Tonight I'm interviewing Sir Richard Branson, who is probably one of the 3 or 4 most famous men in Britain. He and I have clashed before, and it's normally been quite explosive.
The last time I did an interview with him, I think I ended up on the front page of The Sun.
Richard can't stop himself.
I'm never quite sure what's going to come out of his mouth yet.
He's like one of those little toys you buy at Christmas. And I'm hoping that if I crank him up tonight, all hell's going to break loose.
It makes you feel completely at ease, and therefore you just say things you wouldn't normally say.
I didn't know he spent a night in a prison cell.
I thought you'd forgotten about that one.
I didn't know just how close he came to losing his whole empire.
I'm sure there's plenty of things I would rather he didn't talk about.
I mean, I want to get behind the beard and the pullover.
Actually, what am I doing here? It's Piers. I'm off. I'm sorry.
Or Ricky, as your mother calls you. Where are we going here? What are you now called?
I think Richard would be good.
One of the more disturbing surveys that I've seen recently had a question for young children. Who is your role model? Ideal role model. And their parents were first, which you'd expect. Third was Jesus Christ. Second was Richard Branson. Now, how do you feel? Do you feel as uncomfortable as I do that you have come ahead of Jesus Christ, Richard?
I certainly see why you're disturbed. I might get a very big head, but equally, when you have the opposite kinds of polls, like worst dressed person or the worst this or the worst that, I win those as well.
Well, the public, it seems to me, that you think Richard Branson, when I announced your name this evening, there was a real warmth to the reaction. It was all like, oh, great, Richard Branson, great, love him. You're incredibly popular, you come top of all those polls. But I know one thing about business. You do not get to get £1 billion in your bank account unless a little part of you, or even a big part of you, is a ruthless bastard, Richard. Now, are you or are you not occasionally a ruthless bastard?
I don't think actually being a ruthless bastard gets you to the top. I mean, as you were fast learning...
Sorry! I actually think it does.
I think if you're good at dealing with people and you look for the best in people and you get a great team of people around you, you can create successful businesses. If you tread all over people, you're not going to get to the top because people are going to look forward to you stumbling and failing.
But you're not a pushover. You can't be. I mean, you must be tough in business.
If I'm taking on, or if somebody's taking us on like British Airways, we will fight our corner tooth and nail to survive.
What would you say looking back? Obviously, you've had tough moments. What would you say when you look back would be times when you really have been genuinely ruthless? Because you've had to be.
I'm not, to be honest, I'm not good at being ruthless. I mean, there are occasions where, you should sit somebody down and say, they're just not working out at a job. And maybe ask them to go. It's not something I'm particularly good at. So sometimes I will ask somebody else to do it. And it's not good for somebody who's, running a company to pass the buck in a situation like that. And so it's definitely a fault in my character.
I mean, Richard, you have a very avuncular, kind image that the public clearly love. But it hasn't always been that way. I mean, your headmaster's parting words were, "Congratulations, Branson. I predict you will either go to prison or become a millionaire." And as it turned out, you did both. Growing up, Richard was not your average lazy schoolboy. In fact, he was quite the opposite.
He was very much an entrepreneur at a very early age.
It's quite interesting because he had a lot of experiences at school which definitely led him down the road of entrepreneurialism. He was the kid that was, growing the Christmas trees and, breeding the rabbits.
He decided budgerigars, they multiply quite quickly. So he bought a few budgerigars, and we started off with 2, and we ended up with about 60.
They were all, again, good ideas, but they didn't exactly work because he had to go back to school, and we were left doing the work.
Unexpectedly, at the age of just 16, Richard defied his parents and turned his back on his education. With chilling self-confidence, he launched a string of ambitious business ventures.
I mean, his ambition was he wanted to start a magazine. That's why he had to leave school.
It never entered our heads that he was thinking of a national magazine. We thought it was a school one.
When you're 15, people don't take you seriously if you say you want to begin a national magazine. But I took myself very seriously indeed.
He had this ability, you know, I suppose as we say today, to get things done.
Student magazine was a nationwide smash hit with an annual turnover of £100,000. Richard and friend Nick Powell then started a record business on Oxford Street, and they soon realised that shortchanging Her Majesty's Treasury made for big savings.
I did not realise just quite how much money we had saved, in inverted commas.
When they were a little bit financially stuck during the very difficult strike-prone years of 1970 and 71, they were taking some records down to Dover in a van and then re-importing them and basically getting rid of the then equivalent of VAT, which was called sales purchase tax. And he got caught.
Nick and Richard's fraudulent scam, worthy of a lengthy prison term, would nearly ruin their lives and that of the Branson family.
And I got this phone call from Richard, absolutely frantic. Mum, will you come home? I'm in trouble with the police.
I don't think myself and Richard realised just quite how serious what we were doing was.
Having been thrown in a cell for the night, Richard faced either a huge crippling fine or he'd go to prison.
The only way to get him from being put back into prison was to stand a surety.
If I'd had to deal with it, I'd have given him a good beating, which would probably have ended me up in prison as things are now.
I said, we will put our house up as a surety.
Richard and myself clearly felt shame that we had put those people who were closest to us in our lives in such jeopardy.
Bit of a naughty boy, Richard.
Oh, very naughty boy.
I mean, that was a fairly cataclysmic moment in your life.
It was certainly cataclysmic, and I think that one night in a Dover cell, which didn't look actually, it was nowhere near as appealing as the cell picture you showed, is something perhaps that every teenager should go through. Just lying there thinking, I've done terrible things to my family, and secondly, I could spend a year in prison. And
I mean, you knew what you were doing was wrong, didn't you? Did you know it was illegal?
We had a pretty good idea. I mean, we were of an age where I don't think we felt too bad about it. Nowadays, there's no tax between European cities. In those days, there was a tax between here and France, and we were exploiting the fact that there was this tax, and instead of exporting them to France, we're just selling the records in England. And
the figures were quite significant. I mean, by today's standards, it was hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of fraud, really.
Well, it was I think it was £20,000
in old money.
In those days' money, and fortunately, thanks to my mother putting up a house as security, the tax office said, look, pay off £60,000. You've got 3 years to do it. Otherwise, we'll throw the book at you. And it perhaps spurred us on to expand Virgin, like we'd never would have done otherwise. I mean, we opened about 30 or 40 record shops just to get the turnover in order to pay off the fine over the next few years.
And what are you thinking as they slam the door shut on this horrible, ghastly cell? What's going through your head?
Oh, I mean, obviously, incredible regret, wishing we could turn the clock back. My father was a magistrate. My mother let them both down horribly. And a wish that if I ever got out of this situation, that I'd never let myself get into this kind of situation again.